I discovered my sister's betrayal, but I planned a patient and quiet response. There are wounds that bleed without breaking skin. Betrayals that arrive not with a shout, but with a whisper in the dark. When I learned what my sister Margaret had done, what she had been doing for months while sitting at my kitchen table, drinking my coffee, holding my hand, I felt something inside me go still. Not angry, not broken, just watchful. Because at 73 years old, I've learned that the loudest revenge is often the quietest one. And sometimes the people who should protect your heart are the very ones sharpening knives behind your back. This is the story of how I discovered the unthinkable, and how I chose to respond with something far more powerful than rage. Patience. Hello, my dear friends. I'm Alice, and welcome back to Grandma Alice Stories, where I share the lessons life has carved into this old heart of mine. If you're new here, settle in, pour yourself some tea, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the moments that changed everything. And if these stories touch your soul, please subscribe and help me reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. Every click means the world to this old woman's heart. My sister Margaret was born 18 months before me, but we might as well have been twins. We shared a bedroom until we married, whispered our dreams into the same darkness, braided each other's hair every Sunday before church. When her husband died 11 years ago, I held her through the long nights. When mine followed him 6 years later, she returned the favor. We were each other's constant. Two old trees whose roots had grown together so deep, we thought nothing could split us apart. We lived just 4 blocks from each other in the same neighborhood where we'd grown up. Every Sunday morning, without fail, Margaret would walk over with fresh bread from the bakery, and we'd sit at my kitchen table, the same oak table our mother used to knead dough on, and we'd talk. About everything. About nothing. About our children, our aches, our memories of a world that no longer existed except in our stories. My son, Thomas, had been through hell and back. His divorce 3 years ago nearly destroyed him. His wife left him for her personal trainer, one of those modern cruelties that sound like bad television but tear through real lives like wildfire. Thomas moved back closer to me, renting a small house just 10 minutes away. He was rebuilding himself piece by piece, but he was fragile, vulnerable in ways I hadn't seen since he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. Margaret seemed so concerned about him. Every Sunday, she'd ask, "How's Thomas doing? Is he eating enough? Is he managing his finances okay? Poor boy, he must be so lonely." Her worry felt genuine. Her eyes would soften when she spoke about him, and I'd feel grateful, so deeply grateful, that my sister cared about my child as if he were her own. She never had children of her own. It wasn't for lack of trying. God simply had different plans. But she'd always doted on Thomas, sent him birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, even when he was 40 years old, called him my sweet nephew, in that tender voice that made him smile. After his divorce, her attention seemed to intensify. She'd ask if she could visit him, bring him meals, check on his house. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was love. I had no idea I was watching a spider weave her web. The unraveling began on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The air had that golden quality it gets when summer finally releases its grip, and leaves were just beginning to turn. Thomas had stopped by for lunch. I'd made his favorite chicken soup, the one my mother taught me to make with fresh dill and potatoes that melt on your tongue. We sat at that old oak table, and I noticed his phone buzzing constantly on the table between us. "Popular today?" I said, smiling, spooning soup into his bowl. He glanced at the screen and something flickered across his face. Something uncomfortable. He flipped the phone face down. "Just work stuff, Ma." But Thomas has always been a terrible liar. Even as a boy, his left eye would twitch slightly when he tried to hide something. And it twitched then, just for a second, before he focused very intently on his soup. After he left, that little twitch stayed with me. Not suspicion exactly, just a tiny seed of unease, planted somewhere deep. A mother's instinct, perhaps. Or maybe just the wisdom that comes from 7 decades of watching people, learning their tells, understanding that what isn't said often matters more than words. 2 weeks later, Thomas asked if he could borrow my laptop. His was being repaired, and he needed to check something for work. Of course I said yes. He's my son. What's mine has always been his. He worked at my dining room table for about an hour, then got called away for an emergency at his job site. He's a contractor, builds beautiful decks and renovations, works with his hands the way his father did. He left in a rush, promising to come back for the laptop later. It sat there on my table, open, sleeping but not shut down. And I swear I wasn't snooping. I truly wasn't. I just wanted to close it properly, to shut it down the way my grandson taught me so it wouldn't drain the battery. But when I touched the mouse, the screen blazed to life, and there, right there in the corner, was a message notification. From Margaret, my sister. The preview was just 3 lines, but they were enough to stop my heart. Don't worry about your mother. I'll handle her. She means well, but she doesn't understand what you need right now. Trust me, sweetheart. Sweetheart. My sister had called my son sweetheart. My hand trembled on the mouse. The rational part of my brain said, don't look. Close it. Respect his privacy. There's probably an explanation. But the mother in me, the woman who'd carried this child beneath my heart, who'd walked him through every hurt, who knew when something was wrong the way you know when a storm is coming, that woman clicked open the messages. And what I found made the room tilt sideways. Months of messages. Intimate, manipulative, carefully crafted messages. Margaret telling Thomas the first was getting difficult in my old age. Margaret suggesting I was trying to control his life. Margaret positioning herself as his true ally, the one who really understood him while painting me, his mother who would die for him, as an obstacle to his happiness. But that wasn't even the worst of it. There were references to documents, to accounts, to keeping things safe from prying eyes, to decisions Thomas should make before Alice interferes. My late husband's name appeared multiple times. Something about assets, about inheritances, about what Frank would have wanted. Frank, my Frank, who'd worked himself to exhaustion to leave something behind for our son. I sat down hard in my chair, the laptop screen blurring through sudden tears. My sister, my own blood, the woman who'd shared my childhood, my grief, my kitchen table every Sunday for 73 years, had been systematically poisoning my relationship with my son, had been positioning herself as his savior while casting me as his burden. And she'd been doing it with such patience, such care, such calculated tenderness that neither Thomas nor I had seen it happening. The afternoon light slanted through my kitchen window, golden and oblivious. Somewhere outside, children were laughing. A dog barked. Life continued, ordinary and indifferent, while my world quietly cracked apart in the privacy of my dining room. I didn't call Thomas. I didn't confront Margaret. I simply sat there, hands folded in my lap, and felt something inside me go very, very still. Not broken, not yet, but changed, sharpened, because I realized, in that terrible moment of clarity, that I didn't yet know the full truth. If Margaret had been this careful, this methodical, there had to be more, and I needed to see all of it before I decided what to do. So I took a breath, dried my eyes, closed the laptop gently, as if nothing had happened, and I began to watch. That night, I made chamomile tea and sat in my garden as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. Margaret called, like she did every Tuesday evening, cheerful and warm, asking about my day. I answered with the same affection I'd given her for 7 decades, my voice steady, my heart a locked door. She had no idea I knew. And as I hung up the phone and looked at the darkness gathering between the trees, I wondered, how deep does this betrayal go? And when I finally uncover all of it, what will be left of us? They say the truth sets you free, but first, it imprisons you in a cage of your own making. For 3 weeks after I discovered those messages, I became someone I barely recognized. A detective in my own life, searching for evidence of my sister's betrayal while pretending everything was normal. Every smile I gave her felt like swallowing glass. Every Sunday morning when she arrived with her bakery bread and her concerned questions about Thomas, I had to remind myself, patience, Alice, patience, because I needed to know everything before I made my move. And what I found in those weeks of quiet investigation would shake the very foundation of my family. I started small, the way you do when you're afraid of what you might find. The morning after my discovery, I called my bank, the one where Frank and I had kept our accounts for 40 years, where the manager still remembered our names. I asked for copies of all recent transactions, anything involving Thomas's name or accounts we'd set up together. My voice was steady, professional, the voice of a woman handling her affairs, not a mother whose heart was breaking. "Mrs. Henderson, is everything all right?" Janet, the manager, asked with genuine concern. "Just being thorough, dear," I said, and the lie tasted like ash. "You know how it is at my age. Want to make sure everything's in order." The documents arrived 3 days later in a thick manila envelope. I waited until I was alone, truly alone, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, before I opened it. And there, in black and white transactions that couldn't lie, I saw it. Withdrawals from an account Frank had set up for Thomas years ago. An account I was listed as co-trustee on. An account that required both our signatures for any major transactions. Except someone had been making withdrawals. Small ones at first, 2,000 here, 3,000 there. Amounts that wouldn't trigger immediate alarm bells. But over the past 8 months, they totaled nearly $47,000. And every single withdrawal slip had been authorized by signatures that looked like mine and Thomas's, but the dates were days when I knew Thomas had been out of town, or when I'd been at my doctor's appointments. Someone had forged our signatures. My hands shook as I spread the papers across my kitchen table. The same table where Margaret sat every Sunday. The same table where we'd planned our mother's funeral, where we'd laughed over old photographs, where we'd promised each other we'd never end up like those bitter old sisters who stopped speaking over petty grievances. This wasn't petty. This was theft. Calculated, methodical theft. I picked up my phone, then put it down again. Not yet. I needed more. Because if I was going to accuse my sister, my own blood, of something this monstrous, I needed to be absolutely certain. I needed to understand not just what she'd done, but how and why and how deeply Thomas was involved. Was he a victim here too, or a willing participant? That question haunted me more than the money ever could. I started paying closer attention to Thomas. When he visited, I watched his eyes, listened to the spaces between his words. He seemed different lately, more distant, more guarded. When I asked him direct questions about his finances, he'd deflect, change the subject, or give vague answers that told me nothing. And he'd started making excuses to cut our visits short, as if being around me made him uncomfortable. Margaret's poison was working. One afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of. Thomas had stopped by to help me with a leaking faucet under my kitchen sink. While he worked, his phone sat on the counter, buzzing occasionally. When he went out to his truck to get a different wrench, I picked it up. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. His phone wasn't locked. He trusted me, still, despite whatever Margaret had been whispering in his ear. I opened his messages with Margaret. There were hundreds of them. Months and months of daily communication. I scrolled through quickly, frantically, knowing he'd be back any second. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Margaret had been coaching him, carefully and deliberately, on how to handle me, how to deflect my questions, how to keep me out of his business, now that he was a grown man who didn't need his mother hovering. She called me overbearing and controlling, painted my concern as manipulation, and she'd convinced him that the account Frank had left, the one being drained, was legally complicated, and that I might interfere if I knew too much. But worse, so much worse, there were messages about other assets. About Frank's life insurance policy. About the deed to my house, which I'd been considering putting in Thomas's name eventually, to avoid estate complications when I died. Margaret had been encouraging him to secure his inheritance now, before I changed my mind or got confused. She was positioning me as a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with my own affairs. And my son, my sweet boy who I'd raised to be honest and kind, was listening to her. I heard his footsteps on the porch and put the phone down exactly where he'd left it. My hands trembling so badly, I had to grip the counter to steady myself. When he came back in, I was sitting at the table, calm and composed, as if my world hadn't just shattered for the second time in 3 weeks. "Got it fixed, Ma," he said, testing the faucet. Water ran clear and smooth. "Should be good now." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, and watched him flinch slightly at the endearment. Margaret had poisoned even that, the simple love between a mother and her child. After he left, I sat in the growing darkness and made a decision. I needed help. Real help. I needed someone who could trace where that money had gone, who could prove what Margaret had done without leaving any room for doubt or manipulation. I called my lawyer, Gerald Morrison, a man I'd known for 30 years. When I explained what I'd found, carefully, methodically, with dates and amounts and documented evidence, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Alice," he finally said, his voice heavy with concern, "this is fraud. If what you're telling me is accurate, your sister has committed multiple felonies. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady. "Can you help me prove it?" "I can. But Alice, are you sure you want to go down this road? Once we start investigating officially, there's no going back. This will destroy your relationship with your sister. It might destroy your family." I looked around my kitchen, at the walls that held 73 years of memories, at the photographs of Margaret and me as girls, arms wrapped around each other, identical smiles, inseparable. At the empty chair where she sat every Sunday morning. "Gerald," I said quietly, "she's already destroyed it. I'm just deciding whether to let her get away with it." We spent an hour on the phone. He agreed to hire a forensic accountant, to subpoena bank records officially, to trace every transaction. It would take time, he warned me, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and I needed to act completely normal during that time. Couldn't let Margaret suspect that I knew anything. "Can you do that?" he asked. "Can you sit across from her and pretend nothing's wrong?" I thought about all the years I'd loved her, all the secrets we'd shared, the grief we'd survived together, the bond I'd believed was unbreakable. "I've been doing it for 3 weeks already," I said. "I can do it a little longer." That Sunday, Margaret arrived right on time with her bread and her smile. We sat at our table, drank our coffee, talked about the weather and the neighbors and nothing that mattered. And when she asked, as she always did, "How's Thomas doing?" I smiled and said, "He's good, working hard. You know how he is." She patted my hand, her touch warm and familiar. "You're such a good mother, Alice. He's lucky to have you." And I looked into her eyes, those eyes I'd known my entire life, and saw a stranger looking back. Later that evening, Gerald called with preliminary findings. The forensic accountant had traced the withdrawals to an account in Margaret's name. The paper trail was clear, damning, irrefutable. "There's more," Gerald said, his voice grim. "But you're not going to like it." My heart sank. "Tell me." "Margaret made Thomas a co-beneficiary on several documents, without your knowledge or consent. If anything were to happen to you, Alice, she and Thomas would split everything. And based on these messages, she's been actively working to isolate him from you, to make him dependent on her guidance. This isn't just theft. This is calculated." I closed my eyes and felt something inside me finally harden into resolve. "How long until we have everything we need?" I asked. "1 more week, maybe 2. Then we'll have enough to confront them both." or take legal action. I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked to my window and looked out at the street, at Margaret's house visible in the distance, lights glowing warm and innocent in her windows. One more week of pretending. One more Sunday of bread and coffee and lies. And then, I would show my sister exactly what patience and betrayal had taught me. There's a particular kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks. It's not peaceful. It's pregnant with electricity, with the promise of thunder, with the certainty that everything is about to change. I lived in that silence for 12 more days while Gerald gathered the last pieces of evidence. 12 days of Sunday morning coffee with Margaret. 12 days of watching my son avoid my eyes. 12 days of carrying the weight of what I knew while wearing the mask of what I'd always been. But the silence was ending, and I was ready. Gerald called on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks to the day after I'd first hired him. The forensic accountant had finished his work. We had everything: bank records, forged signatures analyzed by a handwriting expert, email trails that Margaret thought she deleted, transaction histories that painted a picture so clear even a child could understand it. $63,000. That's what my sister had stolen systematically over the course of 11 months. She'd forged documents, manipulated my son, and woven a web of lies so intricate that it had nearly succeeded in isolating me completely from the child I'd raised. "What do you want to do, Alice?" Gerald asked. "We can file criminal charges. With this evidence, the district attorney would almost certainly prosecute. Margaret could face prison time." I sat in my kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, and felt the weight of that decision settle on my shoulders. Prison. My sister in prison. The same sister who'd held my hand when I was 5 years old and afraid of the dark. The same sister who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress. Who'd been there when Thomas was born. Who'd mourned with me when Frank died. But she'd also stolen from me. Poisoned my relationship with my son. Tried to paint me as a confused old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. She'd done all of this deliberately, patiently, with calculation and care. "I don't want her in prison," I said slowly. "But I want the truth. I want everyone to know what she did. And I want my son back." "Then we do this privately," Gerald said. "We confront them both together with all the evidence. We give them a choice: make it right or face legal consequences. But Alice, you need to understand. This will end your relationship with Margaret. Permanently. It already has," I said quietly. "She ended it the moment she decided my son's inheritance was worth more than 73 years of sisterhood. We planned it carefully. I would invite both Margaret and Thomas to Sunday dinner. Not our usual casual coffee, but a formal meal. I'd tell them it was important, that I had something serious to discuss about family and the future. Gerald would be there too as my attorney. The evidence would be laid out, clear and irrefutable, and they would have to face what had been done. That Sunday morning I cooked. It's what I do when I'm nervous, when my hands need something to occupy them while my mind races. I made pot roast the way Frank used to love it. I made mashed potatoes from scratch, green beans with almonds, and my mother's apple pie for dessert. A feast, a last supper in a way. Margaret arrived first, right at noon, holding a bouquet of flowers from her garden. "These are beautiful on you, Alice," she said, kissing my cheek. "Something smells wonderful. What's the special occasion?" "Family," I said simply. "Just wanted to have the people I love around my table." Something flickered in her eyes. Was it guilt? Suspicion? But she smiled and helped me set the table, chattering about her week, about the new neighbors, about nothing that mattered. Thomas arrived 15 minutes later. He looked uncomfortable the moment he walked through the door, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. "Ma, what's going on? You said this was important." "It is, sweetheart. Gerald's coming too. Should be here any minute." "Your lawyer." Thomas's face went pale. "Why is your lawyer coming to Sunday dinner?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Gerald stood on my porch, briefcase in hand, his expression professionally neutral. Margaret had gone very still in her chair, her smile frozen in place. "Everyone, please sit," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." Gerald sat beside me at the head of the table. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick with papers, with evidence, with truth. "What is this?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp now, the warmth gone. "Alice, what's going on?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt a strange calm settle over me. No more fear, no more uncertainty, just clarity. "For the past several weeks," I began, "I've been investigating some financial irregularities, money missing from accounts, forged signatures, and what I found, Margaret, is that you've been stealing from me, from my son, from Frank's legacy." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas stared at me, his mouth open. Margaret's face had gone white, then red, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "That's ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "I would never—" "Alice, how could you even think?" "Because I have proof." I nodded to Gerald, who began laying out documents one by one. Bank statements, withdrawal slips with forged signatures, expert analysis proving the signatures weren't ours, transaction histories showing money flowing into Margaret's accounts. $63,000, I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Over 11 months. You forged my signature and Thomas's. You manipulated him, turned him against me, made him think I was the problem while you systematically stole from the accounts his father worked himself to death to create." Thomas was staring at the documents, his face ashen. "Aunt Margaret," his voice cracked. "Is this true?" Margaret's composure shattered. "You don't understand. I was protecting him. From you, Alice. You're getting old, making bad decisions. Someone needed to make sure Thomas's inheritance was safe, that you weren't going to squander it or give it away or... So you decided to steal it instead?" My voice was steel now. "You decided that you knew better than me what my own son needed? You poisoned our relationship, made him doubt me, made him think I was some confused old woman who couldn't be trusted. I did this for him." Margaret was crying now, ugly tears streaming down her face. "He deserves that money. Frank would have wanted." "Don't you dare speak my husband's name." I stood up, and something in my voice made everyone freeze. "Frank trusted you. I trusted you. We loved you like blood because you were blood. And you betrayed that for money." Thomas was looking at the messages now, printouts of the texts between him and Margaret. His face crumpled as he read them, seeing for the first time how he'd been manipulated, how carefully she'd crafted her campaign to separate us. "Oh God," he whispered. "Ma, I'm so sorry. I didn't see." She made it sound like she was helping, like she was protecting me from... His voice broke. "I'm so sorry." I walked around the table and put my hand on his shoulder. "You were vulnerable, sweetheart. She saw that and she used it. That's on her, not you." Margaret was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. "Please, Alice. Please. I'll pay it back. Every penny. I'll do anything. Just don't involve the police. Please. We're sisters. We're family." I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 73 years, and felt nothing but emptiness where that love used to live. "You're right," I said quietly. "We were family, and that's why this hurts more than anything else you could have done. Not because of the money, Margaret, because you tried to take my son from me. You tried to make him believe I was his enemy." Gerald cleared his throat. "Mrs. Henderson has agreed not to press criminal charges on one condition. You repay every dollar you've stolen, with interest, within 90 days. You will have no further contact with Thomas unless he initiates it. And you will sign a document admitting to what you've done, which we will keep on file in case you ever try to claim otherwise." Margaret nodded frantically, still crying. Yes, anything. I'll sign anything." The papers were drawn up right there at my dining room table. Margaret's hand shook so badly she could barely write her name. When it was done, she looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading for something. Forgiveness, understanding, mercy. I gave her nothing but silence. After she left, Thomas and I sat alone in my kitchen. The pot roast sat cold and untouched on the table. Neither of us had any appetite. "I should have listened to you," he said finally, his voice raw. "All those times you tried to ask me questions, and I shut you down because she'd convinced me you were being controlling. God, Ma, I'm so sorry." I took his hand in mine, the same hand I'd held when he was learning to walk, when he'd scraped his knee, when he'd cried over his divorce. "We heal from this," I said. "Together. That's what family does, real family. The kind that's built on trust and love, not blood and obligation." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in months, my son let me hold him while he cried. 3 months later, every dollar was repaid. Margaret moved away shortly after, to Florida, I heard, to be near some cousin I barely remembered. I never spoke to her again. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And honestly, I didn't want to rebuild this one. Thomas and I are closer now than we've been in years. He comes for dinner every Sunday, real dinner with pot roast and pie and conversation that matters. He's learned to trust his own instincts again, to see manipulation for what it is. And me? I learned that patience isn't just about waiting for the right moment. It's about being strong enough to face the truth when it arrives, even when that truth breaks your heart. I learned that family means nothing if it doesn't come with integrity. And I learned that at 73 years old, I'm still strong enough to fight for what's mine. Margaret taught me something valuable in the end, though she never meant to, that loyalty without honesty is worthless, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of someone you love when they've shown you they never truly loved you back. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs its moment to speak. And when it does, it changes everything. Thank you for listening to my story, dear ones. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories and help us reach our goal. Every subscription reminds me that sharing these painful lessons might help someone else find their strength when they need it most. Until next time, remember, patience and truth are the greatest weapons a woman can wield.